Hi and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. Our bedroom for the first 7 years of our marriage was my sanctuary. It was a place of quiet intimacy, a refuge from the noise of the world. And in that sanctuary, my wife had a quirk that I always found endearing. She talked in her sleep. It was never anything profound. It was mostly a jumble of nonsense, a disjointed highlights reel from her day. Muffled words about spreadsheets, a sudden giggle, a frustrated sigh about a delayed shipment at her logistics job. I would lie awake next to her, listening to the soft cadence of her breathing, occasionally punctuated by these little nocturnal pronouncements, and I would smile. It was a charming, harmless part of the woman I loved, a little window into the benign chaos of her subconscious. It was my private joke, a secret language only I was privy to. The sanctuary began to feel less safe about a year after my father passed away. He left me a substantial inheritance, enough to be life-changing. It was a bittersweet windfall, the culmination of his life's hard work, and I felt an immense responsibility to be a good steward of his legacy. We decided, my wife and I, to invest it wisely, to let it grow into a formidable nest egg that would secure our future, our children's future. It was our someday fund. My best friend, Mark, an investment advisor, helped me set it all up. He was more than a friend, he was the brother I never had. We'd known each other since we were kids. He was the best man at my wedding, the one I called for everything from financial advice to help moving a couch. Having him manage the inheritance felt right safe. He put the money in a conservative, long-term growth portfolio. The plan was simple. Don't touch it, let it compound, and in 20 years we'd be set for life. I trusted him implicitly. I trusted them both. They were the two pillars of my world. The sleep-talking started to change around that time. It was subtle at first. The work gibberish was still there, but new words, new phrases began to surface from the depths. The first one that made me pause was, "The principle is secure." She mumbled it with such clarity, such sober finality, that it cut through the usual dream fog. I remember lying there in the dark, my brow furrowed. Principle. It was a financial term. Maybe she was dreaming about a meeting, I reasoned. I dismissed it and fell back asleep. But a few nights later, another phrase floated across the dark bedroom. "Mark says the yield is better than we projected." My eyes snapped open. Mark. Why was she dreaming about a conversation with Mark about financial yields? Again, I found a rational explanation. I had probably mentioned the inheritance portfolio to her. Mark's name had come up, and her sleeping mind was simply connecting the dots. It had to be that. Anything else was unthinkable. The alternative was a dark, twisting path my mind refused to walk down. But the path began to pave itself, one whispered word at a time, night after night. Her sleep talk became a nightly drip of poison into my ear. "The quarterly report is clean. He'll never notice the transfers, they're too small." Larkspur is the perfect cutout. Larkspur. That word echoed in the silent room. It sounded like a project name, a code word. I started to feel a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. The bedroom no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like an interrogation room where I was the sole, unwilling detective, and the clues were being delivered by a sleeping suspect. Paranoia became my new shadow. I started watching them, my wife and my best friend, with a new, terrifying clarity. I looked for the signs, the subtle tells of a shared secret. A glance between them at a dinner party that lingered a fraction of a second too long. An inside joke that they both laughed at but couldn't explain. The way she would text late at night, and when I'd ask who it was, she would say just a friend with a casualness that now felt rehearsed. I started to feel like a guest in my own life, an outsider in the partnership that was supposed to be the center of my universe. I began to doubt my own sanity. Was I losing my mind? Was I taking harmless dream mutterings and weaving them into some grand conspiracy? The thought was almost as terrifying as the alternative. I felt a desperate need for proof, for something tangible to either confirm my fears or, God willing, expose them as the paranoid delusions of a grieving son. So I did something I am not proud of. I bought a small, voice-activated recorder and placed it on my nightstand. The first night it captured nothing but the sound of her gentle breathing. The second night was the same. I started to feel a wave of relief mixed with shame. I was wrong. I was a monster for even suspecting them. On the third night, I hit the jackpot. I listened to the recording the next morning in my car, my heart pounding in my chest. And there it was. Her voice, clear as a bell in the silent car, whispered, "The inheritance is the perfect engine. He gave us the fuel, Mark. We just have to be smart enough not to burn the whole thing down." The word "us" was a gunshot in the quiet of the car. It was the confirmation. It was the end of my world. The drive to work that day felt like a funeral procession for the life I thought I had. The casual, loving marriage, the deep, unbreakable friendship, all of it was a lie, a carefully constructed stage play, and I was the only one in the audience who didn't know the script. The question was no longer if they were betraying me, but how. I needed to understand the mechanics of the deception, the full scope of what they had done. My first stop was the inheritance. I logged into the online portal for the investment account Mark had set up. My stomach was in knots, expecting to see a balance of 0. But to my complete shock, the number staring back at me was correct. The total value of the portfolio was exactly where it should be, a healthy sum that had grown modestly over the past year, consistent with the conservative strategy we had agreed upon. For a moment, a sliver of hope pierced through the dread. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe the sleep-talking was just a bizarre, stress-induced fantasy. Maybe the inheritance is the perfect engine was just a metaphor from a strange dream. But the word "us" still echoed in my ears. I couldn't let it go. I started digging deeper, past the summary page and into the detailed transaction history, the part that no one ever looks at. It was a dense forest of trades, dividends, and fees. I spent hours sifting through it, my old skills from a long-ago finance class slowly coming back to me. And then I saw it. It was a small, recurring transaction, a management fee paid out monthly to a holding company I didn't recognize. The company's name was Larkspur Advisory Group. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't a large fee. It was just small enough to look like a standard administrative expense, a rounding error in the grand scheme of the portfolio. But when I added up the monthly payments over the last year, the total was significant. It was tens of thousands of dollars. They weren't stealing the principal. They were skimming the profits. They were siphoning off the growth of my father's legacy, a slow, methodical bleed, confident that I would only ever look at the big number on the summary page. It was a brilliant, insidious, and deeply personal kind of theft. The money was just the beginning. I needed to know what Larkspur was. A simple corporate registry search gave me the answer. Larkspur Advisory Group was a registered LLC. The registration documents listed a single director, a name I didn't recognize. But a deeper search, a cross-reference of public records, revealed the truth. The director was Mark's brother-in-law. And the registered business address wasn't a corporate office. It was a P.O. box in a town an hour away. It was a shell company, a ghost entity created for the sole purpose of laundering my money. The next step of my investigation felt like a descent into a new circle of hell. If they had a secret company, they had to have a secret business. I started searching for Larkspur not as a corporate entity, but as a brand. I found it on a small, obscure e-commerce website. They were selling high-end, artisanal home goods, custom furniture, handcrafted ceramics, luxury textiles. It was a beautiful, well-designed site, the kind of business she had always dreamed of starting. She had come to me with a similar idea years ago, but the timing wasn't right, the risk too high. I had told her to wait, to build up more capital, to do it the right way. It seemed she had found a different way, and a different partner. The About Us page was the final, brutal twist of the knife. It didn't list their names. It just told a romantic story about the company's founders, a passionate artist with an eye for design and a brilliant strategist who could see the market's potential. They had created a narrative for themselves, a heroic origin story for their secret life, funded by my inheritance. They hadn't just stolen my money and my best friend. They had stolen my wife's dream and given it to each other. I spent the next week in a state of cold, methodical rage. I gathered my evidence. I printed the bank statements, the corporate filings for Larkspur, the screenshots from their secret business website. I listened to all the audio recordings from my bedroom, transcribing the most damning quotes. The whispered confessions about the perfect engine, about clean quarterly reports, about how he trusts us too much. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of the life we had built. The question now was what to do with it. Part of me wanted a dramatic confrontation, to scream and rage and unleash the hurricane of pain they had caused. But I knew that would give them power. It would allow them to frame me as the hysterical, emotional husband. They operated in the world of quiet contracts and hidden clauses. I decided I had to meet them on their own turf. My plan was simple. I would dismantle their secret world piece by piece before they even knew I was coming. My first call was not to a divorce lawyer but to a forensic accountant. I gave him everything I had found. He confirmed my suspicions within a day. The scheme was a classic case of investment fraud and embezzlement. My second call was to the investment firm Mark worked for, not to Mark himself, but to his boss, the head of the compliance department. I laid out the case in a calm, dispassionate email, attaching the evidence of the shell company and the fraudulent fees. I copied the SEC on the email. I knew this would not only end Mark's career, but trigger an internal investigation that would legally freeze all his personal and professional assets, including his stake in Larkspur. My third action was the most direct. Using the evidence of fraud, I had my lawyer draft an emergency petition to a judge. I was granted immediate and sole control over all our joint marital assets, including the joint bank account from which she was undoubtedly funding her day-to-day life. I effectively cut off her access to all money, turning off the financial spigot they had been drinking from. The final piece of my plan was the confrontation. But it wouldn't be a confrontation. It would be a presentation. I waited until a Sunday evening, a time when we were usually relaxed, planning our week. I asked her to sit down at the kitchen table, the same table where we had shared thousands of meals. She smiled, thinking I wanted to talk about vacation plans. I didn't say a word. I simply laid out a folder in front of her. Inside was a single printed sheet. It was a transcript of her own words, the things she had said in her sleep, laid out like a poem of her betrayal. I watched her read it. I saw the color drain from her face, the confusion turning to dawning horror, then to pure animal panic. Before she could speak, before she could formulate a lie, I placed a second folder on the table. This one contained the corporate filings for Larkspur. Then a third folder with the bank statements, the fraudulent fees highlighted in yellow. I was deconstructing her secret life, document by document. She began to cry, to plead, to tell me it wasn't what it looked like. I held up my hand, stopping her. "I don't want to hear your lies," I said, my voice a stranger's in my own ears, cold and steady. "I want you to listen." And then I told her everything. I told her that Mark's career was over, that an investigation was underway. I told her that Larkspur's assets were frozen. I told her that her access to our money was gone. And then, for the finale, I slid my phone across the table and pressed play. It was the recording from that third night. Her own voice, whispering and conspiratorial, filled the silent kitchen. "The inheritance is the perfect engine. He gave us the fuel, Mark." She stared at the phone, her face a mask of utter devastation. In that moment, she understood the totality of her defeat. It was not a crime of passion she had to defend. It was a failed business venture, and I had just executed a hostile takeover of her entire life. She was left with nothing but the words she had whispered in the dark, now brought into the light to condemn her. I stood up from the table. "I have a lawyer," I said. "You'll need one too." I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her there with the ruins of her double life scattered across the table. I went into our bedroom, the place where the lies had been born, and I packed a bag. I didn't feel sadness or even anger anymore. I felt a profound, desolate emptiness. The two people I had trusted most in the world had seen my love and my father's legacy not as a gift, but as an opportunity. They had used my trust as a resource to be exploited. I had built my life on a foundation of what I thought was solid rock, only to discover it was a hollow stage. and the whispers in the night were the sounds of it all slowly, methodically, falling apart. Thank you for tuning in to Reddit Whispers. We've all faced moments when everything felt broken. What was your turning point? Leave it in the comments, because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now.